Hey, everybody. I'm Tim. I've been coming here about a year and a half now. Moved to Helena from the Billings area in 2018 of January 2018. So, wow, I can't see anybody. That's actually a good thing. So, just to let you know a few things about me, I've been a chaplain out at the VA hospital since moving here. And a lot of, I would say, my courage for being up here and telling you the story I'm going to tell you today comes from veterans who have been in war doing things that we've asked them to do that you wouldn't ask anybody to do, especially if you knew they were your sons and daughters and they come back with the war still going on inside of them. So we asked them out there to go after their story and do that in a way that is, it's a story they want to forget, and they've tried to, and it hasn't worked, and it's come to a point where they've gone after it. And so I come in their shadow because of their courage. I've also been a pastor for 30 years and did that and enjoyed it, but have started a new part of that journey. I have 3 kids, and they are here. The next slide there. Grace and Corey are in Billings, Montana, and she's a health and nutrition coach. And then Josh, my son, in the middle there is a car detailer in the Denver area, but not just any car. He looks at my Outback and he scoffs. He does exotic cars like Lamborghinis and Porsches and Ferraris and McLarens and those kind of cars. He can't afford them, so he just details them. And then there's Rachel and Steven, who are in Colorado Springs, about to move up to Helena to start a mobile coffee shop called Montago, which is a combination of Montana and Otago, I think is how you say it, a place in New Zealand where they spent about a year and learning the kind of coffee that Kate will drink with a smile. So I'm excited about having them here. Now, those are some of the Facebook facts about me, but it's not all of my life story. You know how in Facebook people tell things that they want you to see, and they post pictures about how great their family is and how great things are going. But then every once in a while, you get that person who tells us something on Facebook that you're like, oh, that's awkward. And then you unfriend them because that's awkward. But am I the only one that does that? Some of you are thinking, I hope I don't get sick and he's my chaplain. And you may have a point there. But what I wonder as we talk this morning, here's something that I'd like you to think about. What do you think are your expectations on God? What do you believe about how he shows up in your life? Expectations come from the way that you were raised and taught about God in your family or not, your church, the way you understand the Bible, friends' stories about what God has done in their life, the books you've read, maybe podcasts you listen to, or even Christian TV, God forbid. What are your expectations of God? You know, I asked some vets this in a group that I was doing, and they gave the Christian answer first. They said, oh, chaplain, we don't have any expectations on God. I mean, he changes us. We don't change him, right? And I'm like, oh, whatever. And then shared some stories about some expectations that had been exposed in my life, and the room changed. And then 3 of them told the story of how their father died when they were kids. And when the last one told that story, I said, so what was your expectation on God for that? And he was only 6 years old. He said, well, my expectation is that God would take care of my dad. I mean, I need a dad growing up, and he let him die. And if that's all God does, then just F him. I don't need a God like that. That's a reasonable expectation for God, don't you think? For a child to have a father? Well, I would say I've gone into relationship and marriage with expectations. I was unaware of them, but I had them. I mean, these are expectations that I grew up with in my home, and I just figured that's the way everybody did it, right? Because that's the way that it happened in my house. Well, what are your expectations? When I did pre-marriage counseling, this is one of the things that I would ask couples, and they would be like, "Oh, I don't have any expectations. I just want to live with this wonderful person the rest of my life." And I'm like, okay, whatever. This is a counseling skill, whatever. So, but things like, what are the roles of the husband and wife in the marriage? Who cooks the meals? Who does the laundry? Where do the clothes go when you take them off at the end of the day? Like on the floor where they drop, or do they go in the laundry basket? And then how big does the pile get in the laundry basket before they get washed? And who washes them? And who dries them? And then who folds them? I hate folding. It's like drying dishes. I hate that too. But who does those kinds of things? How many times do you wear something before they get washed? How often do you shower? And whose relative's house do you go to for holidays? Or do they come to yours? Or do you do your own traditions? Everybody goes in with expectations, but probably not realizing that because it's the way that it just happened in your home, and so everybody must do it that way. Well, this morning I'm going to break my Facebook rule. I don't know a lot of you really well, and not this well, to tell you this side of my story, but I'm going to tell you that because it has to do with expectations. What my expectations were about God and how they were exposed by tragedy in my life. You know, I practiced those expectations in ministry. I taught them. I ignored it when they didn't work until I couldn't ignore it anymore, when my life came crashing down. And I have concluded that the only way my expectations are exposed and adjusted is through traumatic events. This is a bonsai tree. Now, a bonsai tree is a great example to me. It kind of fits my life story, because when a gardener does bonsai, they'll take it out of its native soil. And they'll cut usually up to a third of its roots off, and then transplant it in a shallow pot like this. And they'll put new soil in it, and they'll wire it in. And they'll wire the stem and reshape that stem while it's still tender into a way that they want that to look. The gardener has a vision for what they want to do with that tree. The tree has no idea, if trees have ideas, the tree has no idea how it's going to look or what shape that's going to take. They just go through the trauma, right? And once they plant it and they wire it, they cut back a lot of the branches, and then they'll wire the branches, and the main ones that they keep, and they'll put it into a new direction. And this one is wired so that it will go a new direction. And then what the gardener does is he waters it and waits, and it grows. And then he waits some more. And it's a great picture of my life. The way my expectations were exposed and are being corrected is through that kind of trauma. Now, let me tell you my story. My father was strict. He had a lot of rules and consequences for breaking those rules. But my hope was, by following those rules, that I could earn his love and approval. And so I worked hard to obey my parents. I learned the drill. But Dad didn't really know how to do relationships. He knew how to handle breaking the rules and punishment, but not the relationship that followed in the good times. Well, then the churches that we went to, they had rules too. Not a lot of compassion, but I knew the drill from home. I tried to stay awake during the sermons, like some of you are working on right now. And I walked the aisles at the invitation. If you grew up in the South, you know what I'm talking about. I did the Bible memory. I read the Bible that I didn't understand at all. I isolated from the world like they taught me that I should and made my social group the church. And do you know, after all of that work, the only time I remember my dad telling me that he was proud of me was when I became a pastor of a church. And I thought, that's a lot of work to earn love and respect. God seemed that way too. God was just my dad, who's supposed to be God. God with my dad's face and kind of with my dad's heart. So I became a pastor and I worked hard at my church. I tried to earn love and respect. I would put in 60, 70-hour weeks to prove to someone that I was worth love and respect. And my church grew and the respect grew, but I couldn't receive it. Or maybe it was just that I couldn't earn the kind of love and respect that I was looking for. So I worked harder. And meanwhile, I had my family back home who longed for me to be there. And somehow I just couldn't. Or when I was there, I was so worn out, I wasn't really there. So here's my question. How would I learn what God's love is really like? I mean, as long as my expectations I grew up with didn't crash, there'd be no reason to adjust or to investigate my view of God or relationships until it happened. My world came crashing in, and at first I thought, I have no faith in God. I can't believe in a God who doesn't take care of me any better than that. But then I began to read the Bible in a different way. I was worn out trying to earn God's approval. And what if I couldn't earn his approval? Well, my wife and I were committed to her staying home and raising the kids until they got older and they didn't need her around as much. And so then she went back to school to finish off her degree. But I was starting to fall apart. With all the work for approval, I went on antidepressants. And it began to affect my wife, too, who normally was a very happy and upbeat type of person. She got on antidepressants, too. And that's when I knew my view of how life and love and relationships, how they work, wasn't working. In fact, it was hurting not only me, it was hurting the people around me. So I felt like it was time to leave the role of lead pastor and the work of proving myself. I think I had begun to see what was driving me to work, and I asked God for a place where I could do the things that I loved to do the most, wherever that was. And so I accepted an invitation from a friend of mine, Vern, at Harvest to work up there as a teaching pastor, discipleship pastor, kind of focused on development, the next stage of faith. And I loved that place. I mean, Harvest is a place you walk in, and on either side, there are like 30, 40-foot climbing walls, and there's energy there. There's a lot going on. I would literally go to bed early so I could get up early and get to work. But I had my evenings free mostly, and so I would be home, and the relationship with my kids that I had missed for a lot of their growing up was being restored. My wife was going to school, but she was beginning to struggle with her faith as she went through a biology program there. In fact, she began to spend all of her free time at the school doing research and studying and talking to professors and earning good grades and their admiration. In fact, the things that she complained about me doing at my last church, we switched roles. And then one day she came home and she told me that she had fallen in love with her professor, but that she was telling me because she wanted to earn my trust and love back. And that began a 5-year struggle for our marriage. But I knew this game. I'd worked hard all my life to try to earn the love of others. My parents, God, the church, But it didn't work any better with her than it had with them. She came back the next year after all that work, and she said they had fallen back in love again, and yet she wanted to tell me so that she could win her family back. And I kept on trying to be lovable and to gain respect, and it just never happened. So finally, in 2010, she told me that she was leaving me and her kids and her faith, and I was devastated. This wasn't supposed to happen. I mean, God takes care of everyone who follows him in my expectation, but especially pastors. That's a different category, right? I mean, they're supposed to be blessed, and their marriages are great, and their families are great, and their life is great. They're the examples of what God does when he blesses people. That was my expectation. And so I began to pray, God, change her, give her faith in him back again, return her love for her family. And that prayer didn't work. So again, I knew this game, and so I changed tactics. Okay, God, then change me. It must be me. So whatever, I'm moldable, pliable, whatever the word is, I am. And so do that. And that didn't work. And so finally, my third prayer was, okay, screw it. You obviously don't care. So, whatever. That was kind of my prayer for God to change himself. And that didn't work. Well, during this time, I was still a pastor at Harvest, doing the work I loved, but I felt unworthy. I felt like a fake. I mean, no pastor was supposed to struggle like this. And I was doing things that I loved. I was involved in starting a men's ministry that was doing great. It was growing. It was helping me as much as it was helping the guys. I was involved in a partnership with churches in Ethiopia, and we were developing each other cross-culturally. We were doing an orphan adoption ministry. We even started a business in Ethiopia to hire widows so that they could make money and wouldn't have to give up their kids to adoption. Things were going great. I was teaching the Bible about how God works, but confused because he wasn't working that way. Not in me, not in my family, not really anywhere. But how would I discover wrong expectations? My work was great, but my soul was crushed. I even went to Vernon, the council, and I said, the church is bigger than me. You don't need a pastor who's struggling with the stuff I'm struggling with. I can't even tell you why. It just doesn't feel like God's here or blessing me or anything. So I turned in my resignation. And they said, no, we're not going to accept that. We want you to be here for this. We want to be with you through this. And so I kept on going, but still felt inauthentic, and I gave them my resignation again, and they sent it back again, and they said, no, we're not going to accept this. You're here. And I look back on that, and I wonder, what if that was really where I needed to be during that time? Well, in 2012, I went to Israel for a study trip. I was going to guide a group there, and so I was doing some study for those different locations. And one of the places that we went was a place called Caesarea Philippi. This is a place that the gospel mentions that Jesus took his disciples to this place right before he went down to Jerusalem, and he kind of did an ordination there. And in Matthew 16, it talks about Jesus taking them to this spot, and it mentions Caesarea Philippi very specifically with this question. And he asks them, who do you say that I am? And Peter responds, representing the faith of most of the disciples. And Peter says this, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And that statement would become the foundation of this new community that Jesus was starting. It was a miniature kingdom of God on earth. And so Jesus responds to him and to the faith of those disciples, and he says, now I say to you that you are Peter, which is the Greek word. It means Petros. It means rock. And on this rock, I will build my church. On this statement, on the foundation that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Now, the context of Caesarea Philippi even helps us understand this a little bit more, because it was the location of a large temple area. And the next slide. Yeah, it was built against this large rock wall. You see a cave on one side, and it says this was in the Old Testament days. The tradition is that the Canaanite worship of the god of fertility, Baal, was done here. When Alexander the Great came through in the 300s, he exchanged Baal, the Canaanite god, with the Greek god Pan, who was half man, half goat. In all the depictions of Pan, the thing that's most notable about those idols is his male genitalia. I'll tell you more about that, or you can Google it. That'd be even better. Now, in this worship area, there were 3 temples, and this next slide is kind of a reconstruction of 2 of them. But there was a temple to Pan that was against the cave opening, that a big spring flowed out of this cave. And then next to that was a temple to the god of the goats, with a big goat pin next to that. And then during Jesus' day, one of the sons of Herod the Great, Philip, built a large white marble temple for the worship of Caesar, who was the one who gave Philip power. So he was the quintessential brown-noser by creating worship like that. So the Greeks worshipped Pan, and the tradition was that Pan would go into through the gates of Hades, which is what this cave was called. The spring would flow out of this cave, go through the temple, and become one of the headwaters of the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee and down to the Dead Sea. And so the tradition was that Pan would go in every fall, and he would go in through this cave called the Gates of Hell, and he was kind of a snowbird, so his winter home was in Hades. I was trying to think of a way that you could relate to that here. It's kind of like the I-15 corridor down to Arizona, when all of our snowbirds go down to Arizona for the south. It's kind of like that, but not really at all. So the way that the Greeks worshipped this god Pan was that every spring they would try to motivate him to come back from his winter home in Hades, and to come back and fertilize the earth. And the way that they did that was pretty gruesome. The priest would get the image of Pan out of the niche in the wall in that cave, and they would take it around, and then other priests would bring an Asherah pole that dated back to the Canaanite worship of Baal, and they would take that around, and that was basically an erect man's part. And so the men would produce their semen, and then they would go to the goat temple, and they would have sex with the goats, and not a pretty picture. Now, the Jews hated this spot, as you can imagine. No rabbi would bring his disciples there for any reason. In fact, the tradition was that the Messiah would come and destroy this place in order to set up his kingdom. And yet Jesus says, upon this rock, I'll build my church. Jesus, is it possible he was saying to his disciples, now, look, I'm going to build my church from the people who are here doing the disgusting acts that you're seeing here in front of you. Not the good religious people down in Jerusalem trying to earn God's respect and approval. No, these people here doing these heinous acts. I'll build my church on this rock, and the gates of Hades will not overpower the building of my kingdom. Imagine how shocked the disciples would be at that, and I was shocked, because one of the things that the guide said to that team was, he said, why don't you go back to the temple ground, pick up a rock, throw it into that cave that went down to the gates of Hades as a reminder that this was your life that God bought you back from, to give you his design back, his purpose back, and throw that back into the cave. Well, the group went, and I stayed. In fact, I climbed back up to a place that overlooked this rock wall as I was watching them throw their stones in. I was a wreck. I was thinking about my life. What would I do now? I felt like I couldn't be a pastor anymore. I just couldn't do it. That's not what pastors should be doing. What would my family be like? We're forever changed. What would I do? Where would I go? And I felt God speak to me. And I wanted to tell you that, God doesn't often speak to me like this because I don't want you to think I'm weird, but just sit with that. I felt God speak to me in one of those clear ways where I felt him say, Tim, I want your story, not your study. And you need to understand that I hid well behind my study. It was a comfortable place for me living in my head, not dealing with the stuff going on in my heart. And then he said, I want your experience, not your expertise. I was respected around Harvest. I was the staff theologian. I was the go-to guy for understanding the Bible. And I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. And this terrified me. I mean, what if people turned from me and my story like my father had turned from me when I broke the rules and didn't turn back when I kept the rules? What if people turned from me like my wife had turned from me and I couldn't earn her love back? And I wept because I knew what God was asking and I wasn't interested. And so this began a 4-year running from God. I moved to California because that's where people who run from God go. Not really. But that's where I went. And then I became a financial advisor, might as well get comfortable. And then I remarried a California blonde. I mean, I might as well get comfortable and have God in this safe place, this margin, where I could control him. And yet that didn't work. In fact, a year after our marriage, she asked me to leave. And again, my expectations were exposed. I came back to Montana, and the friends who took me in told me that they were very concerned about me because it seemed like I was suicidal. I had no compass for this. My life was falling apart. And I began this process of training for chaplaincy because the training program for chaplaincy meant that you confronted your life, your stuff, because when you walk with people in trauma, you need to be facing yours. Otherwise, you run from them because you don't want to face you. And during this time of training, God gave me a verse that was something that Paul dealt with when he had something going on that he asked God to remove. He called it a thorn in the flesh. And in 2 Corinthians 12, he says, 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. And each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. There were years I read this verse and I couldn't go through it all. Especially this next part. So now I'm glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults and hardships and persecutions and troubles I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I'm strong. And that was my expectation, that I would get stronger and stronger. And Christ said, no, actually, it's the other way around. God was bringing me back to my Caesarea Philippi call. I want your story, not your study. I want your experience, not your expertise. As I meet with different people every day, realigning their expectations of life and relationships and how God works, I found as I was going after my story, I could be with them as a fellow pilgrim. There was such a contrast of getting up to speak from my study and expertise with sitting with a person to hear their story and their experience. Now, I believe God put me in my roles as pastor, and I am grateful for them and enjoyed them. But this was the first time God showed me how my expectations were wrong, that he loves me when I fail and when I grow, that I don't have to be perfect to be growing, and that my story is being used best when others going through their own realignment of expectations. This is the bonsai. I'm the bonsai. God's taken me out of my native soil. He's cut my roots. He's put me into a new plant, a pot. He's realigning me, and he's waiting as I grow. And oh, that seems slow. I've learned that my expectations only adjust through traumatic events. I'm learning God loves me in my messes and my successes. That the way that I move toward him into deeper relationships is to be known for my failures and successes. His power works best in my weakness. And guys, that's what the church is. Not a meeting for the repaired, but a gathering of those celebrating God's love and unconditional forgiveness over and over. We tell our stories not out of shame, but from a desire to draw from God's power and community and move toward him and toward others. I had a Native American elder tell me a couple of weeks ago, Tim, when you stand before God, you will bow your head not in shame, but in humility. And that's who I am. This is part of my story, and it shapes me. And I assume some of you have a story too. I'd like to pray for us and invite the band to come up as I'm doing this. And I've asked Kate to play a song that has been my story. And as we do this, I'm going to invite you just to kind of sit and let the words soak in, because as they soak into me, it reminds me what's going on. And maybe it'll be something you can identify with. So let's pray. So God, it's a story about our shaping and realignment. It's a difficult story, but we can do it with community. So thanks for exposing my expectations and giving me some experience of freedom. And those purging out of the old expectations and replacing them with the reality of what your love really looks like.
So if you've been around Narrate for more than half an hour, you've heard us talk about gathering and scattering. So we gather here on Sunday mornings at Grand Street, and we work really hard to create conversations on topics that are relevant to you and your everyday lives. And then we get out in our community, and we scatter with events like Ales for Trails. So Ales for Trails, obviously, I don't have to talk about it. The video just talked about it. Anyway. So Adam and I sit on a team of about 20 people or so who are involved in the community. There are business owners, community leaders. We work with the city a lot to put on Ales for Trails. It's a great way, we feel like, to give back to the community and give back to the trail system. And I definitely get that, like, beer festivals and church are usually two areas that don't intersect a lot. So I get that it's maybe a little weird or uncomfortable, but we think it's a great way to be involved in our community. So just so you know, Narrate gives about $1,000 for a sponsorship. And then other than that, there's no money that goes from here to Ales. But one fun thing, though, is Narrate, you guys all, are about over half of the volunteers that day. And then the other half are people in the community who know and love the event and love and support the trails. So if you are interested in getting involved with Ales for Trails, we do have some roles left, mostly at that 7 to 9 shift. We've got a few shifts for working the gate, checking IDs, putting on wristbands, and then selling tickets. So if you're interested, we do have sign-up sheets in the back. You can swing by that table on your way out Also, we do recognize that this event isn't for everyone. Not all of you should go to Ales, and that's totally fine. We respect that. We've got a great scattering the following day on Saturday, May 18th. We're going to be going down to the YWCA. They're right down the street. They're a really awesome transitional living home for women and their children. And so we're going to go down there and do some spring cleaning and some yard work and some gardening. So we'd love for you to join us. If you're not able or don't want to be a part of Ales, totally get it. We've got a great opportunity for you that Saturday. Oh, and those sign-up sheets are in the back as well. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Maybe not. Okay, what? Oh, yeah. Thanks. I was on that. All right, so this morning we've got a really great treat in store. We're going to listen to Tim Weidlich. So he was on staff at Harvest with Adam. Now he lives here in Helena, and he is the chaplain up at the VA. So we're really excited to get to hear from him this morning. All right, so we're going to do offering now. If you came intending to give, you may do so now. If not, just let the buckets fly right on by you. And also remember, you have the opportunity to give via the Church Center app. All right, thanks.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.